The Oregon wilderness does not forgive hesitation. Miles of Douglas fir close in on both sides of a dirt road that stops, without warning, at a wall of blackberry and fern. Beyond it, a ridge of rock rises into gray sky, cold rain, silence that has not been disturbed in years. A young woman stands at the end of that road with a single duffel bag and an iron key older than anything she owns. She looks at the ridge. She starts climbing. Somewhere in a city far south of here, a man in an expensive suit is already making phone calls. His car is pointed north. He has done this before with other properties, other families, other people who did not understand what they were standing on. She finds it just before dark, a steel door buried in the hillside. The key fits. She pulls it open. The air that comes out has been waiting for a very long time. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and money that had long since run out. It was a particular kind of smell, the kind that settles into the walls of a place where important things happen to other people. I had learned to recognize it in the offices of social workers and case managers, but here it had a different weight to it. Here the disappointment was upholstered in leather and polished mahogany. My name is Avery Greystone. I was 18 years old and I had been in the state's care for 8 of those years. The morning of my birthday, my social worker Carol had handed me a bus pass, a prepaid phone with $40 of credit on it, and a single sheet of paper with Pell Norwood's office address printed at the top. She called it a formality. Your grandfather's estate, she said, the words clinical and practiced, the way a doctor says a word that used to mean something terrible but has been said so many times it no longer does. You're his next of kin, you have to be there. So there I was. One day, after aging out of the system that had been my entire world since I was 10, sitting in a leather chair that cost more than every possession I had ever owned, which were all packed into a single duffel bag at my feet. The chair sighed when I shifted my weight, a soft sound of protest. I felt like I was wearing someone else's skin. The suit jacket I had pulled from the group home's donation bin was too tight across the shoulders and too loose everywhere else. A costume for a part I had never auditioned for. 2 years in group homes had given me one skill worth keeping, the ability to make myself small, to observe, to expect nothing. It was a good skill to have in a room like this. Pell Norwood looked as old as the books lining his walls, thin white hair combed back from a pink scalp, glasses that made his pale eyes look larger than they were, like something watching from deep water. He did not offer condolences. He cleared his throat, a dry sound, and slid a thin folder across the polished expanse of his desk. The single sheet of paper inside seemed impossibly small to contain the sum of a man's life. After settling outstanding debts, Norwood said, his voice measured and careful, the remaining liquid assets of the estate amount to $1,472. He paused. The number hung in the air between us like smoke. I felt nothing. I had not seen Birch Greystone since I was 10 years old. He had been a ghost for 8 years, a name on a file, the man who had driven me to a government office on a Tuesday morning and told me he could not take care of me anymore. A pittance felt appropriate, a final, silent confirmation of what I had always suspected, that I had not been worth the trouble. There is, however, Norwood continued, one other item. He reached into a drawer and produced a large manila envelope, thick and yellowed with age, sealed with a dark wax stamp pressed into the shape of something I could not quite make out. It looked like something from another century. He slid it across the desk, and it stopped just short of my hands, close enough that I had to lean forward to claim it. My name was written on the front in a spidery, unfamiliar script, Avery Greystone. He was very specific, Norwood said, watching me. This was to be given to you only on your 18th birthday and only after the will had been read. Inside, I could feel the hard, unyielding shape of a key and the stiff edges of folded paper. Then the door opened. He did not knock. That was the first thing I noticed. In a room this formal, in an office that smelled of money and old wood and professional distance, the door simply opened and a man walked in as though he had every right to be there. He was around 40, with hair combed back with gel and a suit that probably cost more than the entire contents of my duffel bag several times over. He moved with the particular confidence of someone who has never been told no in a way that actually stuck. He set a business card on Norwood's desk with the smooth precision of someone who had performed this gesture 1,000 times. Mace Drummond, he said, representing Radford Enterprises. He smiled at me, not at Norwood. The smile was pleasant and completely empty of warmth. I understand this is a difficult time, Miss Greystone. He spoke like he was reading from a script he had already memorized. My client has a long-standing interest in the Oregon parcel referenced in the estate. We would like to make this simple for you. $3,000 paid today, and you walk out of here with more than twice what the estate holds in cash. You don't have to deal with the legal complexity of a remote land transfer. You can start your life. Norwood stood up. He was not a tall man, but he straightened in a way that changed the shape of the room. Mr. Drummond, this meeting is a private legal proceeding, and you were not invited. I will ask you once to leave. Drummond held up a hand, the gesture of someone conceding a point they never actually conceded. Of course. He picked up his card and looked at me one more time before turning to go. The offer stands, Miss Greystone. Norwood has my number. He left. The door closed behind him without a sound. I looked at Norwood. Something had shifted in the room. Some pressure I had not noticed building was now impossible to ignore. Norwood did not sit down immediately. He stood at his desk with his hands flat on the surface, looking at the closed door. Then he looked at me, and something passed across his face that his professional training had almost managed to conceal. Not pity. Something closer to urgency. He picked up the manila envelope and held it out until I took it. "Read this alone," he said quietly, "before you speak to anyone." His hands, I noticed then, were trembling very slightly. I tucked the envelope into the inside pocket of my jacket and stood. As I turned to go, I glanced back through the narrow gap of the door that had not quite latched. Norwood was on the phone, standing at the window with his back to the room, his voice low and fast, his free hand pressed flat against the glass as though steadying himself. I could not hear a single word, but I recognized the body language of someone delivering a warning they had been dreading for a long time. I walked out into the gray morning and did not look back again. The bus ride north took 14 hours. The city bled into suburbs, which thinned into farmland, which eventually dissolved into the dense, dark green of the Oregon wilderness. I watched it all through the window, feeling like a person who had been cut loose from everything they had ever known and was now drifting towards something that had no name yet. I waited until the city was fully gone before I opened the envelope. Inside was an iron key, heavy and pitted with rust, its surface the color of dried blood. And beneath it, folded into a tight square, was a piece of paper unlike any I had seen outside of a museum. Thick, yellowish parchment, the kind that holds ink differently than modern paper does. A hand-drawn map, a circle in red ink with an X at its center. Coordinates written in neat, careful numbers. And below them, in that same spidery script from the outside of the envelope, a single instruction. The door is on the north face of the ridge. The key fits only one lock. Trust what you find. Burn the rest. I read it 3 times. Then I looked out the window at the trees sliding past in the dark. My grandfather had been a carpenter. Or at least, that was what I had always been told, and what my own fragmentary memories suggested. A man with calloused hands who smelled of sawdust, who could fix anything broken, who once spent an entire afternoon teaching me to skip stones on the river behind his small, cluttered house. Not a man of secrets and iron keys and parchment maps. Not a man with any history worth hiding. But I had been 10 years old when I last knew him, and 10-year-olds are not reliable witnesses to the full complexity of a person's life. The bus dropped me at a crossroads with a single blinking yellow light. Hemlock Creek, a gas station, a diner with a neon sign that flickered on the letter E, and a general store with a faded Coca-Cola logo painted on its brick-side wall. The air hit me when I stepped off the bus, sharp and cold, carrying the smell of damp earth and pine. Something in my chest moved when I breathed it in. Not a memory exactly, but the shape of one, the outline of something that had once been familiar and warm, and had been gone so long I had almost forgotten I was missing it. I went into the general store for a flashlight, batteries, water, and protein bars. The man behind the counter was somewhere past 60, with a weathered face and the kind of steady, unhurried quality that comes from decades of watching other people rush. "Wick Blackwell," he said when I paid. The name offered the way small-town people sometimes offer their names as a simple fact, not a performance. He glanced at the flashlight and the water. "Heading somewhere?" "Ridge Road," I said. "Looking for a parcel of land out that way." He stopped moving. Not dramatically, not in any way that would have seemed significant to anyone who was not paying close attention. But I was paying close attention because 2 years in group homes had made me very good at noticing the moment a room changes. "Greystone land," he said. It was not a question. "My grandfather's," I said. His face did something complicated, a layering of emotions I could not fully read. He pointed out the window, 5 miles that way. Road turns to gravel after 2, then to dirt. Properties at the very end where the road stops. He paused. His hands rested flat on the counter. Someone was asking about that parcel yesterday, he said. Person from some company by the look of him. Hair like he'd used half a bottle of something to get it flat. Nice suit, wrong shoes for the mud out here. He was measuring the road end, or something like it. I thought about the way Mace Drummond had looked at me in Norwood's office, the pleasant, empty smile of a man who had already done his calculations. How long was he out there? I asked. Long enough, Wick said. I thanked him and paid for my things and walked out into the cold. The 5-mile walk felt longer than it was. The paved road gave way to gravel as promised, then to packed dirt, then to something that was barely a track at all, 2 shallow ruts through the undergrowth with a strip of weeds growing down the middle. The sky was the flat, uniform gray of a sky that has made up its mind about rain and is simply deciding when. The trees grew denser and taller on either side, Douglas firs that blocked out most of the remaining light, their trunks straight and enormous, rising up into a canopy that muffled every sound. I pulled my jacket tighter and walked faster. By the time the track ended in a wall of blackberry bushes and ferns and young alder, the rain had started. Not a hard rain, but a cold, deliberate one, the kind that gets inside whatever you are wearing, no matter how well you have sealed yourself against it. I stood at the end of the road and looked at my grandfather's land. There was nothing there. No house, no cabin, no ruins of one. Just 5 acres of wild, overgrown forest, the undergrowth thick with years of uninterrupted growth, the canopy so dense it had kept out most of the sun and shaped everything beneath it accordingly. Pale, reaching, grasping toward light it rarely found. It was exactly as worthless as Pell Norwood had described. And standing there in the rain with the end of the road behind me and nothing in front of me but trees, something in my chest that I had been trying not to call hope quietly collapsed. I had spent the last of my bus money getting here. I had followed an iron key and a hand-drawn map to a piece of land in the middle of nowhere because a dead man had written my name on an envelope and told me to trust what I found, and there was nothing here to find. I almost turned back. I had the coordinates from the map. I found the ridge easily enough, a steep spine of rock and earth running along the back of the property, its north face slick with moss and rain. I scrambled along its base for what felt like an hour, the cold getting into my fingers, the wet getting into my boots. Several times I nearly went down. Several times I told myself this was insane, that I was an 18-year-old with $40 of phone credit and a protein bar, hunting for a door that probably did not exist on the instructions of a man I barely remembered. Then my foot slipped on a loose patch of earth. A small cascade of soil and rock tumbled away from the ridge face, and in the gap it left, half buried under a fresh layer of mud, was a corner of something that was not stone. It was concrete, gray, formed, deliberately shaped concrete, with a right angle that rock does not make on its own. I dropped to my knees and started digging. The cold stopped mattering. The rain stopped mattering. I dug with my bare hands, pulling at roots and soil, scraping moss away from the surface with my fingernails until they bled. I uncovered a large rectangular concrete slab set flush into the hillside, smooth and deliberate, clearly the work of someone who had known what they were doing and had done it carefully. And in the center of that slab, recessed into the surface, was a heavy steel door. No handle, no hinge visible from the outside, just a single dark keyhole. My hands were shaking when I pulled the iron key from my pocket. Whether from cold or adrenaline, I could not have said. I wiped the mud away from the keyhole with my thumb and guided the key in. It resisted. For a long grinding moment, nothing moved, and I thought, of course the key does not fit, and there is no lock in this particular universe that was ever waiting for Avery Greystone, and this is how the story ends, cold and wet and alone in the Oregon wilderness. Then something deep inside the door shifted with a sound like a joint cracking after years of disuse, and the key turned. I braced both hands against the concrete frame and pulled. The door was immensely heavy, hung on hinges that had not moved in years, and it fought me every inch of the way. I got it open just far enough to slip through sideways, and a breath of air came out from the dark interior, dead and cold, and carrying the faint metallic scent of machinery that has been waiting. I switched on the flashlight. I stepped across the threshold, out of the rain and into my grandfather's secret. The beam cut through a darkness so complete it felt like a physical substance. Short, steep concrete steps led down into a square room below. I pulled the heavy door shut behind me. It closed with a boom that resonated through the soles of my boots and plunged me into a silence so absolute that my own breathing sounded enormous. I stood still for a moment, just breathing, until my heartbeat came down from where it had gone. Then I took the steps down and let the flashlight show me the room. Military construction. That was the only description that fit. The walls were thick poured concrete reinforced with steel, the ceiling crossed with I-beams. Along one wall, metal shelves held supplies arranged with methodical care, sealed tins of rations, canvas bags I recognized as gas mask containers, steel canisters of water, a row of batteries still in their original packaging. In one corner sat a narrow cot with a wool blanket folded across it, precise and flat as if waiting for inspection. A small wooden table, a single chair, everything functional, everything chosen by someone who had thought carefully about what a person might need and for how long. It was a bunker, a fallout shelter, a place built by someone who had lived with the knowledge that the world could turn dangerous and had decided to build his response to that knowledge rather than simply fear it. My grandfather had built this, with his own hands if I knew anything at all about who he had been. I swept the flashlight beam across the room again, and it caught something under the cot. A footlocker, olive green, its latches not locked. I crossed the room and knelt beside it. The latches sprang open with a flat, metallic snap. The smell hit me before I saw anything. It was sawdust and pine resin, and something else beneath those, something mineral and cold, that I could not name but that my body recognized before my mind did. I sat back on my heels on the concrete floor because my legs had simply stopped cooperating. Inside the footlocker, a flannel shirt worn thin at the elbows, denim overalls, work clothes, the kind my grandfather had always worn, the kind that still held the shape of the man who had lived and worked in them, and under the clothes, wrapped in a square of old cloth, a framed photograph. I wiped the dust from the glass with the hem of my jacket. A girl of 5 or 6 sat on a man's shoulders. Both of them were squinting into bright sun, both of them grinning with their whole faces, the unself-conscious happiness of people who do not know they are being watched. I did not remember the moment being captured, but I remembered the feeling of sitting that high up, of the world spreading out below, of the absolute certainty that the hands holding my ankles would not let go. I sat down on the floor of my grandfather's bunker, with his photograph in my lap, and looked at it for a long time. At the very bottom of the footlocker, beneath the photograph, was a bundle of envelopes tied together with a length of twine. More than 10 of them, each one addressed to me in that same controlled, spidery script. Above the bundle, separate from it, was a single envelope with one word written across its front. First. The word my grandfather had chosen, the precision of it, the care, told me that everything that followed had been arranged and considered over a very long time. My hands were shaking when I untied the knot. I sat on the edge of the cot, the thin mattress springs speaking softly in the silence, and I unfolded the letter inside. Several pages, the paper dry and crisp, every line filled with writing, so controlled it looked as though the person producing it had been working against the resistance of their own hand. My dearest Avery, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are a grown woman. I hope the world has been kinder to you than I was. I know you have questions. I know you must hate me. You have every right to. The handwriting did not waver on that line. He had known that and had written it steadily. Before you were born, I was not a good man. He wrote about a younger version of himself that I had never known and had no frame for. Not the carpenter, not the man who fixed things and built birdhouses and smelled of sawdust. Another version, one who had signed his name to land deals he should have walked away from, who had sat across from a man named Crispin Radford and told himself that the money was worth the questions he was choosing not to ask. He wrote about the moment he understood what Radford actually was. Not a developer, but something older and simpler and uglier, a man who took what he wanted through fear and paperwork and the careful purchase of people in positions of authority. He wrote about trying to leave. He wrote about threatening to go to the police. That was my mistake, he wrote, not because it was wrong, because I did not understand how he would respond. Radford did not threaten him. He wrote that I needed to understand that clearly. Radford had not threatened Birch Greystone. Radford had hired people to follow a 10-year-old girl to school, to sit in a car outside the park where she played on Saturday mornings, to make it clear, without a single explicit word, that the leverage existed and would be used. I stopped reading. I remembered a black car parked at the curb outside my school for 3 consecutive afternoons. I had told my grandfather about it. I could see the moment in my memory with strange clarity, the way a moment sometimes crystallizes when you later understand it was one of the last of its kind. I had told him, and he had gone very still and then very careful, and he had said it was nothing, just my imagination. His voice had been controlled and even. 1 week later, he drove me to the Department of Child Services and told the woman at the front desk that he could no longer provide care. I forced myself to keep reading. As long as you were tied to me, he wrote, you were a target. You were leverage. The only way to truly keep you safe was to make you disappear into a system so large and bureaucratic that a man like Radford could not trace a single file within it. I had to sever the connection between us completely. I had to become the man who had abandoned his granddaughter. I had to be that so that you could be safe. The day I drove you to that office, I watched you walk through the door. I saw your face when you turned back and looked at me through the glass. I have seen that look every day since. I drove away, and I did not stop for 100 miles. Every year after that, I woke up knowing that my granddaughter believed she had been thrown away. I lived with that. I chose it. I would choose it again because you were alive, and you were somewhere he could not reach you. The letter fell from my hands. The sound I made in that bunker was not crying, exactly. It was something that happened before crying, something that the body does when it has been carrying a weight for so long that it has stopped registering the weight as a weight and has simply accepted it as the shape of existence, and then the weight is suddenly gone, and the absence of it is almost unbearable. 8 years of a specific and practiced kind of loneliness. 8 years of a story I had told myself about who I was and why I had been left and what that meant about my value to other people. All of it revised in the space of several handwritten pages by a dead man who had loved me in the most brutal and selfless and costly way I could imagine. I cried on the floor of a concrete bunker buried in an Oregon hillside, and the sound came back to me from the walls, and I let it. When it was over, I was empty and very quiet. The bunker no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like something else, a room that had been waiting, a room that had been kept clean and dry and stocked with everything a person might need to survive, by someone who believed that person would come. I picked up the last page of the letter and read the final paragraph. This bunker is yours now, Avery. There are supplies here to last you for months. There is more information hidden in this room if you choose to look for it, but you do not have to. My fight does not have to become your fight. You can take the money I have left and start a life somewhere new. Forget about me and forget about Crispin Radford. That is all I ever wanted for you, to be safe and to be free. Whatever you choose, know that I loved you. Know that every day I was proud of you. Your grandfather, Birch. I sat with that for a long time. Then I stood up, took the flashlight, and began to search. He had written that there was more information hidden in the room. I worked systematically, pressing along the walls, checking the undersides of shelves, running my hands along the frame of the cot. My grandfather had been a practical man. He would not have built a puzzle. He would have hidden something in the last place a person looked, which in a room this sparse meant the floor. Under the cot, in the space where the footlocker had been, the surface of the concrete was different, almost invisible in ordinary light, but the flashlight at a low angle caught it. A hairline seam forming a near-perfect square, roughly 2 feet by 2 feet. Not a crack, a deliberate cut. I used the tip of the iron key as a lever, working it into the seam, and the concrete panel shifted with a grinding reluctance and came free. Beneath it was a small, dark cavity. Inside the cavity was a steel document box, heavy for its size, its lid closed but not locked. I carried it to the table and set it down, opened it. The top layer was cash. Stacks of $100 bills bound with rubber bands, more money than I had ever seen in one place, tens of thousands of dollars at minimum, maybe more. Below the cash was a thick leather-bound ledger, its cover worn smooth with handling, and beside it, another envelope sealed with the same dark wax stamp. I opened the envelope first. The handwriting was the same, but the voice was not. This was not a grieving man writing to a granddaughter he had failed. This was a man preparing for something he had accepted he would not live to see. Avery, it began. If you have found this, you chose not to run. I am sorry for that. I am sorry this has come to you. But I am also more proud than I know how to say. The ledger was everything. Every illegal transaction Radford had made in 15 years, recorded by Birch in his capacity as the company's internal bookkeeper, encoded in a system of his own devising but explained in full in the letter I now held. Bribes to county officials, fraudulent loan instruments used to manufacture debt against properties Radford wanted, families pushed off land their grandparents had built. And at the center of it all, the land on this ridge, the last holdout in a plan to build a luxury resort on terrain worth millions to the right developer. 5 acres of supposedly worthless rock, the final piece. He does not know about you, my grandfather had written. He thinks when I die, the land will fall into probate and he will take it for nothing. He has no idea what I left here. Take this to Pell Norwood. He is the only man I trust. He will know what to do. What you do with it after that is your choice. Avenge me or live for me. Either way, be safe. I was still reading when the phone rang. The sound was so foreign in that underground silence that I knocked the steel box with my elbow catching the phone. The screen read Pell Norwood, I answered. His voice was nothing like the measured, formal voice from the office that morning. He sounded like a man who had been running. Avery, listen carefully. Radford Enterprises filed an emergency foreclosure claim against the property 2 hours ago. They have produced a promissory note with your grandfather's signature claiming he defaulted on a substantial debt secured against the land. The note looks legitimate. I know Birch would never have signed it. But they have a judge, and that judge has granted an expedited hearing. We have 48 hours to respond formally, or the court will transfer title. I looked at the ledger sitting open on the table. There is something else, Norwood said, and his voice dropped further. Mace Drummond called my office 2 hours after you left this morning. He knew you were on your way to Hemlock Creek. Someone has been watching my building, Avery. I do not know if they know about the bunker, but if they tracked you here and you spent the night on the property, they will start asking questions by morning. I looked at the heavy steel door at the top of the stairs, closed and silent above me. Do they know about this? I asked. Not yet, Norwood said. But not yet has a short lifespan. Can you get back tonight? I looked around the room my grandfather had built. The cot, the table, the chair, the carefully stocked shelves. A room full of a kind of love I had not known how to recognize until an hour ago. I'm already on my way, I said. I packed the ledger and the cash into the duffel bag, then carefully placed the photograph and the bundle of letters on top, tucking them flat against the lining. Before I climbed the stairs, I stood at the bottom for a moment with the flashlight beam aimed at nothing in particular, and the silence of the earth pressing in from every direction. My grandfather had built this room with his hands, stocked it with everything he thought I might need, written me letters he could not send for 8 years, and died alone holding a secret that had cost him everything. He had done all of it so that I could walk away if I chose to. I was not going to walk away. I climbed the stairs, pushed the heavy door open against the weight of the hillside, and stepped back out into the cold Oregon night. The rain had stopped. Above the ridgeline, through a break in the clouds, there were stars. I pulled the door shut behind me and listened to its seal. Then I started walking. The walk back to Hemlock Creek took nearly an hour, the duffel bag heavier on my shoulders than it had been going out. The darkness between the trees had settled into the particular stillness that comes after rain, every surface holding its own small silence. I thought about the 48 hours Norwood had described and what they meant in practical terms. A bus south before dawn, a meeting, a courtroom, a deadline. What I had not yet fully processed was the scale of what had been waiting for me in that hillside, the weight of a man's 12-year preparation, now transferred entirely into my hands. The light was still on in Wick Blackwell's store when I reached the edge of town, though the sign in the window said closed. I could see him moving behind the counter, stacking something on a low shelf. I kept walking toward the diner, where a single booth near the window was still occupied, and the coffee sign in the window still glowed red. I was halfway past the store when the door opened. Wick stood in the doorway, not blocking it, just present. He had his jacket on, his keys in his hand as if he had been about to leave and had decided not to. You were out there a long time, he said. I stopped. I looked at him in the thin light from the store window and thought about what Norwood had told me, that someone had been watching his office, that Drummond had known I was heading north. I thought about what Wick had told me earlier, that Drummond had been out at the end of Ridge Road the day before I arrived. I made a calculation. Someone came out to that property tonight, I said, after I arrived. Did you see anyone go past? Wick was quiet for a moment. Then he stepped back inside and held the door open. Come in, he said. The store was warm and smelled of feed grain and the particular domestic quiet of a place that has been lived in and worked in by the same person for a very long time. Wick poured 2 cups of coffee from a machine behind the counter without asking and set one in front of me. I saw headlights on the Ridge Road around 9, he said. Truck I didn't recognize. Sat up there maybe 20 minutes, then came back down and went south. He wrapped both hands around his own cup. This is about more than the land, isn't it? It was not a question. I looked at him across the counter. He was not asking out of curiosity. He was asking the way a person asks when they already have a piece of the answer and are trying to understand where their piece fits. How long have you been here? I asked. 31 years, Wick said. My father had the store before me, his father before that. Then you knew what this valley looked like before Radford Enterprises started acquiring parcels. His jaw tightened. I know what it looks like now, he said. I know how many families sold when they didn't want to and moved when they didn't plan to. He picked up his cup and set it down without drinking. Your grandfather was the last one who didn't sell. Everyone in this county knew it. Whatever he left you, Avery, you need to move carefully with it. I nodded once. I need to be on the first bus south, I said. It runs at 4:15, Wick said. I'll drive you to the crossroads. I started to say that wasn't necessary. He shook his head before I finished. I knew Birch for 30 years, he said simply. That was the end of the conversation. The bus arrived 6 minutes late and was almost empty. I slept for 3 hours somewhere past midnight and spent the rest of the ride watching the dark countryside, press back into the lights and density of the city, thinking about what Norwood had said about the promissory note, a forged signature, a purchased judge. The machinery of it was not complicated. It was just thorough. Radford did not take risks. He built systems. He bought the people who were supposed to stop him and moved in the spaces that left open. My grandfather had understood that, which was why the ledger existed. I was almost to the bus stop at the edge of the property when I heard footsteps on the gravel road behind me. I turned with my hand already moving toward my bag before I registered that it was a woman, small and white-haired, moving with the deliberate steadiness of someone who has learned to conserve energy for what matters. Blythe Whitmore had been standing on the porch of the house beside the abandoned farm when I walked past it in the afternoon. She had watched me go up the ridge road, and she had watched the headlights of the truck Wick had mentioned, and she had been waiting when I came back down. I have something you need to see, she said, holding a shoebox of documents tight against her chest, and I have been waiting 6 years for a reason to show it to someone who could use it. I looked at her for a long moment, this small, precise woman with her careful eyes. Then I said, the bus runs at 4:15. Norwood met us at a private entrance on the ground floor of his building. Now, they stood in Norwood's ground floor office, the three of them, with the desk cleared and the duffel bag emptied and the ledger open between them under the single lamp. Norwood reached out and touched the cover before he opened it. His hand was steadier than it had been in his office that morning, but only barely. I told him to burn it, he said. He was speaking more to himself than to either of them. I told him the risk was too great. But Birch was not a man who could destroy a record of what had been done to people. It was not in him. He looked up at me. His face without its professional mask was older than I had expected and more tired, the face of a man who had carried something difficult for a long time. He saved my life once, Norwood said. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way he would have called saving. 25 years ago, there was a case brought against me, professional misconduct, fabricated by someone who wanted me removed from a matter I was handling. It would have meant disbarment. Your grandfather testified for me when no one else would. He knew what it cost him to do it. He did it anyway. He looked back at the ledger. I have owed him a debt ever since that I did not know how to repay. He paused. Maybe this is how. Blythe set her shoebox on the corner of the desk without ceremony and began laying documents on the surface beside the ledger, arranging them in a sequence that was clearly not random. The farm next to Birch's property was mine, she said. My father's before that, and his mother's before him. 3 generations of the same land. She did not say it with drama, just fact, the weight of it carried in the flatness of her voice. 6 years ago, a promissory note appeared in the county records with my signature on it. I did not sign it. I had never heard of the lender whose name was on the instrument, but the judge issued the foreclosure order in 30 days, and by the time I found a lawyer willing to look at my case, the land had already been transferred twice, and the paper trail was buried under 3 layers of holding companies. She placed one document at the top of the arrangement, a copy of the original foreclosure order, its official seal faded but legible. Your grandfather came to see me the week after I lost the farm, she said. He sat at my kitchen table and he told me he was sorry. I did not understand why he was apologizing. He had not done anything to me. She paused. I understand now. I looked at the documents spread across the desk, then at the open ledger beside them. 2 records of the same crime, assembled from different directions. Is your name in here? I asked. Blythe looked at the ledger. Birch told me, the last time I saw him, that he had been keeping a record. That if anything happened to him, someone would eventually come, and it would be useful. She exhaled. He was very certain someone would come. She looked at me, not at the ledger. At me, we began to work. Norwood translated the coded entries in the ledger, reading the cipher from Birch's second letter, cross-referencing each entry against the date and amount with Blythe's documents, building a chronological picture from the ground up. The pattern emerged slowly at first, and then all at once, the way a shape in deep water becomes visible only when you stop looking for an outline and let the whole thing come into focus. 15 families over 12 years, forged instruments, manufactured debt, county officials paid in amounts small enough to be deniable and consistent enough to be systematic. A judge whose name appeared 3 times in the ledger, each time beside a specific dollar figure and a case number. The resort development on the ridge had been planned for years. Radford had acquired every parcel except Birch's through the same mechanism, the same manufactured debt, the same compliant judge, the same patience. 5 acres of rock and overgrowth, assessed at nothing, worth millions as the linchpin of a completed land package. The sun had begun to show at the edges of the curtains when Norwood finally closed the ledger and sat back in his chair. "This is enough," he said. His voice carried a quiet certainty that had not been there at the start of the night. "More than enough. But we cannot take this to the county court." He looked at me. "The judge assigned to your hearing today is the same judge whose name appears in that ledger. 3 times, beside 3 specific sums of money." I absorbed this. I looked at Blythe, who was looking at the foreclosure order with an expression that had no name I knew for it. "Then we need someone above the county," I said. Norwood picked up his phone. He said he was going to call someone he had known for many years, a woman at the state investigative office who, in his words, hated corruption the way most people hated physical pain, instinctively and without limit. He said he had done her a professional service once and she had not forgotten it. He put the call on speaker. Agent Fern Underhill answered on the second ring, which told me that Norwood had already sent a message ahead that whatever he had said had been enough to keep a state investigator awake. "Talk to me," Underhill said. Norwood talked. He described the ledger in precise terms, the number of entries, the categories of offense, the timeline. He mentioned the judge's name. There was a silence on the other end of the call that lasted long enough to become its own kind of statement. "Original documents," Underhill said finally. "Physical ledger, not copies. And a witness who was a direct victim of the scheme." Blythe leaned toward the phone. "I have 6 years of documentation," she said. "Every communication I received during and after the foreclosure, every letter I sent that went unanswered." Another silence. "My office," Underhill said, 2 hours. "Do not photograph the ledger, do not scan it, do not send anything digitally. Bring the physical documents and both of you come in person." She paused. "Norwood, you know what you have there." "I believe I do," Norwood said. "You understand that if the county judge is compromised, we cannot file anything in that court. We go directly to the state court for an emergency intervention order, which means your timeline just compressed significantly." "We have just under 14 hours, Norwood said. "Then stop talking to me and start moving." The call ended. Norwood looked at the 2 of us across his desk. He looked older in the gray morning light and more alive than he had looked the previous day, the weariness still present, but underneath it something that had not been there before. Purpose, maybe. The particular alertness of a man who has been waiting for a long time to do something that matters. We were almost out the door when the telephone on Norwood's desk rang, a landline. The number that was not listed anywhere public, that went only to existing clients and to the people who had a reason to call it directly. Norwood answered. His face changed within the first few seconds, not dramatically, but in the small specific ways that tell you a conversation has gone somewhere unpleasant. He put the call on speaker without explaining why. Mace Drummond's voice filled the room, unhurried and practiced. "Norwood, I just wanted to make sure Miss Greystone is aware that the clock started running at midnight. She has a little under 14 hours now. I would hate for the timeline to catch her by surprise." He paused. "Please let her know the offer is still available. We're flexible on the number." Norwood said nothing. Drummond waited a beat, then said, "Have a productive morning," and ended the call. The silence that followed lasted 3 full seconds. "He knows we're moving," Blythe said. "He knows we're awake," I said. "He doesn't know what we have." I picked up the duffel bag with the ledger inside and settled the strap on my shoulder. I looked at Norwood, at Blythe, 2 people who had their own reasons, their own losses, their own debts to settle. "Then let's show him," I said. We went out into the early morning, the city just beginning to move around us, and 14 hours left on a clock that had been running since before I was born. Agent Fern Underhill was not what I had imagined from a voice on a phone at 6 in the morning. I had imagined someone harder, someone with the angular impatience of a person who had spent too many years dealing with things that should not have required dealing with. Instead, the woman who met us in the lobby of the state investigative office was compact and still, with short gray hair and a quality of attention that made you feel, when she looked at you, that she was reading something you had not intended to make visible. She shook Norwood's hand first, then Blythe's, then looked at me for a moment longer than the others. "How old are you?" she said. 18, I said. Underhill nodded once, as if confirming something she had already suspected. "Come upstairs." Her office was on the fourth floor, windowless, with 2 additional agents already present when we arrived. Neither of them introduced themselves. They simply took positions at the edges of the room and watched while Underhill cleared her desk, and I set the duffel bag down and produced the ledger. Underhill put on a pair of reading glasses and opened it without ceremony. The room was quiet for a long time. One of the agents made notes. The other documented each page with a handheld scanner, working from the back to the front. Blythe laid her documents on the side table in the sequence she had established at Norwood's office, and one of the agents began cross-referencing them against the ledger entries without being asked. Underhill read for 40 minutes without speaking. When she finally looked up, she took off her glasses and set them on the desk and looked at me directly. "I need to tell you something," she said. 2 years ago, this office received a formal complaint about Radford Enterprises. 3 families, sworn statements, documented irregularities in county foreclosure proceedings. The file was reviewed and closed." She paused. "The agent who closed it cited insufficient evidence and jurisdictional complexity. That agent no longer works here. But the person who signed off on the closure decision was not an agent." Norwood leaned forward slightly. "The closure was approved by a supervising magistrate with authority over state investigative priorities," Underhill said. "That magistrate's name is on the docket for your hearing this morning as the presiding judge." The silence that followed was of a particular quality I had not encountered before. Not the silence of shock, but the silence of several people simultaneously understanding something whose full dimensions were still becoming visible. "He didn't just protect Radford in the county courts," Blythe said quietly. "He closed the door at the state level, too." Underhill set the ledger down. "Then we do not ask his court for anything," she said. "We go over it." She looked at Norwood. "I can have an emergency intervention petition before a state appellate judge within 3 hours. That judge will not have received anything from Radford's people because Radford's people did not know this office was involved." She picked up her phone. "The hearing this morning proceeds as scheduled. Your job is to walk into that courtroom and let Radford's lawyers present their case. My job is to make sure the room changes before they finish." Norwood looked at her. "You need us in that courtroom." "I need the original hearing to be on the record," she said. "If we pull the hearing entirely, Radford's lawyers file an objection, and the whole thing goes into procedural limbo for months. If the hearing proceeds and is then superseded by a state intervention order mid-session, the county case is voided and we control the timeline." She looked at me. "This means you walk into a courtroom this morning, knowing that for a period of time, possibly a significant one, it will look like you are losing." I thought about Mace Drummond's voice on Norwood's landline. The practiced courtesy of a man who had made this call many times for many properties and had never once needed to mean what he said. "I understand," I said. Underhill studied me for another moment. Then she put her glasses back on and picked up the phone and began making calls that had clearly been prepared for a very long time, waiting for the right evidence to make them possible. We had 6 hours before the hearing. Norwood took Blythe to a conference room to prepare her witness statement. I sat in a chair outside Underhill's office and did not sleep, though I had not slept in more than 30 hours. I thought about my grandfather sitting in a bunker on a hillside in Oregon, writing letters he could not send to a granddaughter he could not contact, recording in a leather book every crime he had witnessed so that someone eventually could use it. I thought about what that kind of patience cost, the particular loneliness of a person who has made a decision they cannot explain to anyone and must carry alone. At 8:45, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered because I had learned in the past 24 hours that unknown numbers sometimes mattered. The voice was male and younger than Drummond's, flat and without effect. "Miss Greystone." I want you to think carefully about what you're doing. There are people connected to Mr. Radford's business interests who are not Mr. Radford, people with families, people who made decisions a long time ago that they cannot undo and who will be affected by whatever you put into motion today. He paused. Consider whether this is really your fight. I said nothing for a moment, then, tell whoever sent you that I considered it. I ended the call and walked back into Underhill's office and told her about it. She listened, then called the number back from a department line. It rang to a disconnected tone. She noted it in her file without visible reaction. He's rattled, Underhill said. People who are winning don't make calls like that. The courthouse was a gray stone building 4 blocks from Norwood's office, its steps worn smooth by decades of foot traffic, its lobby smelling of floor wax and recycled air. We arrived 40 minutes before the hearing, Norwood and Blythe and I, and sat in the corridor outside the assigned courtroom on a wooden bench that had absorbed a century of waiting. Crispin Radford arrived 12 minutes later. I had built a picture of him from the documents and my grandfather's letters, and the reality of him was both more and less than I had expected. He was tall, silver-haired, with a kind of physical presence that comes not from size, but from a lifetime of walking into rooms and having them reorganize around him. His lawyers flanked him, 2 men in their 40s carrying matching briefcases, moving with the synchronized efficiency of people who had done this many times. Drummond walked a step behind, and his eyes found me the moment they entered the corridor. Radford stopped in front of me, not because he had to, not because I was blocking his path. He stopped because he chose to, and the choosing was its own kind of statement. "Miss Greystone," he said. His voice was exactly what I would have predicted. Warm, measured, the voice of a man who had spent decades being the most reasonable person in any room he entered. "I understand this has been an extraordinarily difficult few days. I want you to know the offer remains open. We could resolve this before we go in there. $7,000, clean transfer, no further complications for anyone." I looked at him. I had been awake for more than 30 hours. I was wearing the same clothes I had worn into the Oregon wilderness, and I was sitting on a courthouse bench with a duffel bag at my feet. I was 18 years old, and I was the granddaughter of the man who had spent 12 years documenting everything Crispin Radford had ever done. And I understood in this moment that Radford did not know that. He saw a tired girl with no resources and no leverage, making a last symbolic stand before the inevitable. "My grandfather was a bookkeeper," I said. Radford's expression did not change. "I'm sorry." "Before he was a carpenter," I said. "He kept books, very detailed books. He was meticulous about it." Something moved in Radford's eyes. Not alarm, not yet. More like the recalibration of a man who has just realized the ground beneath him is not exactly where he thought it was. He looked at me for 2 more seconds, then turned and walked into the courtroom. Drummond did not look at me as he followed. That, I thought, was more telling than anything Radford had done. The hearing began at 10. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, with tall windows that let in a flat gray light. The presiding judge entered, and I recognized the name from the ledger, a man in his late 60s with a square face and the particular stillness of someone who has learned to perform neutrality so completely it has become indistinguishable from the real thing. Radford's lead attorney presented the promissory note with practiced authority. He walked the court through the instrument in careful detail, the date, the amount, the notarization, the chain of custody that connected it to Birch Greystone's estate. It was a document designed to look inevitable, the kind of paperwork that makes resistance feel like error. Norwood waited until the attorney sat down. Then he stood, and he said, "Your Honor, before the court proceeds, I wish to submit supplementary materials pertaining to the business practices of the plaintiff, materials that bear directly on the validity of the instrument before you today." He placed a folder on the clerk's desk, not the ledger itself, selected documentation, verified and certified overnight by Underhill's office, presenting a portion of the pattern without revealing the full scope of what we held. The judge took the folder. He opened it. I watched his face. The first page, the second. Halfway through the third, he stopped moving. He did not turn to another page. He simply held the folder open at that page and looked at it, and the courtroom, which had been conducting itself with the brisk efficiency of a proceeding whose outcome was already decided, went very quiet. Radford's attorney rose to object. The legal grounds were technical, and the argument was competent. And for approximately 90 seconds, the room tilted in a direction that I felt in my chest rather than understood with my mind. The judge had set the folder down. The attorney was speaking with increasing confidence. Norwood was on his feet, responding, but his voice had taken on a careful quality, the voice of a man choosing every word because he knows the footing is uncertain. Then the door at the back of the courtroom opened. Underhill came in first, followed by one of the agents from her office. They walked down the center aisle without hurrying, without any of the self-consciousness of people entering a space where something important was happening. They moved like people who had decided what they were going to do and were simply doing it now. Underhill went to the judge's bench. She placed a document in front of him, said 4 words that I could not hear from where I sat, and stepped back. The judge read the document. His face did not change, but his hands did, a tightening at the edges that told me the document said exactly what Underhill had said it would say. "The court will recess for 15 minutes, the judge said. Radford's attorney turned to his client. I watched Radford's face in that moment, the moment between when a man understands that something has changed and when he decides how to respond to that understanding. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then Radford looked across the room at me, and for the first time since he had stopped me in the corridor, his expression was not performing anything at all. Underhill crossed the room to the plaintiff's table. She leaned down and said something to Radford quietly. Whatever she said it in the tone of someone delivering information that is not open for discussion. Radford looked at the document she placed on the table in front of him, and then he looked at his attorneys, and the attorneys looked at each other. Drummond had stopped moving entirely. He was sitting very still in the chair beside the plaintiff's table, with his hands flat on his knees, looking at a point on the wall across the room that contained nothing. The recess lasted 11 minutes, not 15. When the judge returned, he was accompanied by a second judge I did not recognize, a woman in her 50s who took a chair to the left of the bench and opened a folder of her own. The presiding judge addressed the room. In light of the intervention order received from the state appellate court and the materials submitted by the state investigative office, this court's jurisdiction over the matter of Radford Enterprises versus the estate of Birch Greystone is superseded. The instrument submitted by the plaintiff has been flagged for forensic review. The claim of foreclosure is stayed pending investigation. He looked at the plaintiff's table. Counsel for the plaintiff is advised that additional proceedings may follow from the state office. He looked down at the folder in front of him. The parcel designated Ridge Road B14, Hemlock Creek, Oregon, remains under the legal ownership of the estate of Birch Greystone to be transferred without encumbrance to the named heir, Avery Greystone. The court so orders. The gavel came down. I sat very still. Norwood put his hand on my shoulder, and I felt the weight of it, the solid and unperforming reality of it, and something in my chest that had been braced since the previous morning slowly released. Underhill and her colleague approached Radford. There was no scene. There was no moment of dramatic confrontation or public humiliation. There was simply a quiet conversation at the plaintiff's table, and then Radford stood, and then he and his attorneys and Underhill's colleague walked together toward the side door of the courtroom, and then they were gone. Drummond signed something one of the agents placed in front of him. His pen moved across the page with the mechanical steadiness of a man who has understood that cooperation is now his only remaining option. Then the courtroom was simply a room again, ordinary and echoing, and full of the small sounds of people gathering their things. Blythe was sitting in the row behind me. When I turned, she not crying, but her eyes were bright in a way that told me the effort of not crying was considerable. She reached across the bench and put her hand briefly over mine and then took it back, and neither of us said anything, because there was nothing to say that the moment had not already said. What followed was not an ending. Endings are clean, and what came next was not clean. It was weeks of phone calls and document filings, and the slow, grinding work of institutional justice moving through its proper channels. Radford Enterprises was placed under state investigation within 48 hours of the hearing. The county judge resigned from the bench before formal charges were filed. Drummond's cooperation agreement became a matter of public record when the state attorney's office announced the scope of the investigation, which was broader than even the ledger had suggested, reaching into adjacent counties and involving officials that Underhill's office had been watching for reasons entirely unrelated to Birch Greystone. 15 families were notified that their cases were being reviewed. Some of them would recover their losses through settlement. Some would not because the land had been transferred too many times and the trail was too old and the law moves slowly, even when it moves in the right direction. But they would know. Each of them would receive a letter explaining what had been done to them, and by whom, and that knowledge, I came to understand, was not a small thing. Blythe Whitmore's case was one of three that Norwood filed for direct review. It would take 18 months, but the manufactured instrument that had been used to foreclose her family's farm was ultimately voided, and a portion of the property value was recovered through civil settlement. Blythe put the settlement toward the fence that had been rotting for 6 years, and a new roof on the barn she had been renting from herself for longer than that. 2 weeks after the hearing, I drove out to her property with a bag of tools and spent a Saturday afternoon helping her pull the old fence posts. She did not ask me to. I simply showed up and she handed me a pair of work gloves without comment, and we worked until the light was gone. It was the most useful I had felt in a very long time. I paid Norwood from the cash in the steel box. He refused twice and accepted on the third offer, and I suspected the amount I paid him was considerably less than his actual fee, though he never said so. I drove back to Hemlock Creek in a used pickup truck I bought for $4,000 from a lot on the south edge of the city. The truck ran well and smelled of the previous owner's dogs, and I drove it north with the windows down and nothing I needed to be afraid of anymore. Wick Blackwell was behind the counter when I pulled into Hemlock Creek. He saw the truck and came to the door of the store before I had finished parking. He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, not blocking the entrance, just occupying it the way a person does when they have been expecting someone. "Heard it went the right way," he said. "I got out of the truck. It went the right way." He nodded, went inside and came back with a cup of coffee, handed it to me over the threshold. "You going to stay?" he asked. "For now," I said. He seemed to find this an adequate answer. He told me that Birch had come in every Saturday morning for as long as Wick had been running the store. Coffee in the county paper, always the corner table by the front window where you could see both the road and the ridge in the distance. He was not a talkative man by nature, but one morning the previous winter he had said something that Wick had not known what to do with at the time. He said he was waiting for something he had put in motion a long time ago to come around, Wick told me. Said the waiting was the hardest part, not because he doubted the outcome, but because he would not be there to see it. He looked at me. I didn't know what he meant then. I drove the rest of the way out to the property in the afternoon light, parked at the end of the dirt track, and walked the land on foot the way I had walked it the first time, except that this time the sky was clear and the undergrowth looked different in sunlight. Less forbidding, more simply wild. I spent an hour cutting back the blackberry canes along the ridge face with a pair of loppers I had bought in town, clearing the worst of the overgrowth from the path I had climbed in the dark and the rain. The bunker door was where I had left it, sealed and invisible unless you knew where to look. I found the foundation of my grandfather's house near the western edge of the property, half buried under ferns and decades of leaf fall. I had to clear away a considerable amount of growth before I understood what I was looking at. Granite stones, hand-selected and fitted without mortar, the corners tight and true after what must have been 30 or more years of freeze and thaw, and the slow insistence of tree roots. Not a single stone had moved. I sat down on the foundation wall and looked out at the ridge in the late afternoon light. I thought about what it meant to build something that way, without the shortcuts, without the speed, fitting each piece with enough care that time could not find the gaps. My grandfather had built a bunker the same way, and before that had built a life the same way, doing the careful work that no one would ever see and that would not announce itself until the moment it was needed. I went down into the bunker that evening. The air inside was different now, clean and cold rather than dead, the mineral smell of earth and concrete without the sealed staleness of years. I had left everything in place. The cot, the table, the chair, the photograph I had set in the center of the table where the light from the lantern I brought could reach it. I sat in the chair and opened the last bundle of letters. 11 envelopes, each one labeled with a year in my grandfather's careful hand. I opened them in order, the way I understood I was meant to, beginning with the year I turned 11 and moving forward one letter at a time. They were not dramatic letters. They were the letters of a man who had made his peace with a decision he could not undo and was simply trying to maintain some form of connection across a distance he had imposed on himself. He wrote about the weather on the ridge and the progress of the garden he kept at the back of the house he had since sold. He wrote about things he had repaired and things he had built. He wrote, sometimes, about what he imagined I was doing, the careful conditional tense of a person who knows they are guessing, who knows the guess might be entirely wrong, who makes it anyway because the alternative is silence. In the letter from the year I turned 15, he wrote, I think about whether you have found something you are good at, not talented at, necessarily, though I hope for that too. Good at, in the sense of finding it right and true, the way certain work feels right in the hands when you are doing what you were built to do. I hope you find that. I think you will. You were always more interested in understanding how things worked than in simply accepting that they did. In the letter from the year I turned 17, I have been working on the bunker again. Small things, maintenance, checking the seals on the door. I do this partly out of habit and partly because working on it makes me feel as though I am still doing something useful, as though the gap between us is not simply empty, but is full of something I am still building toward. The last letter from the year I turned 18 was shorter than the others. The handwriting was less controlled, the letters slightly larger, as though the hand that produced them had grown less certain of its own steadiness. I do not know if you will come, he wrote. I have tried to be honest with myself about this. You have every reason not to. You have every reason to take what little I left and make something new somewhere else, with no connection to me or to this land or to any of the choices I made on your behalf without asking you. I would understand that. I would have no right to object to it. But I think you will come. I think I have always known you. Not the person you became in the years I was not there, which I cannot know, but something underneath that, something I recognized when you were 5 years old and sitting on my shoulders asking questions I did not always have answers for. That person, I think, does not walk away from a thing unfinished. If I am right, then you are reading this in the place I built for you, in the room where I kept everything I could not send, and you know by now most of what there is to know. I am sorry for the cost of it. I am sorry you had to carry it, but I am not sorry that you came. Do something good with the land, Avery. Not grand, not profitable, not impressive, just good. Build something that will still be standing when you are gone and that someone else will be able to use, and that was made with care. That is all I ever knew how to do. I believe it is enough. I folded the letter carefully and held it in both hands for a moment. The lantern light was steady and warm on the concrete walls, and the silence of the bunker was not the silence of the first night, but simply the silence of a room where nothing needed to happen right now, where the urgent and the dangerous had already been resolved, and what remained was simply the quiet. I thought about the granite foundation, the tight corners, the stones my grandfather had chosen individually and fitted together by hand, and the decades that had passed without moving any of them. I thought, I know what I am going to build. I turned the lantern down, climbed the stairs, and pushed the heavy door open into the Oregon evening. The sky above the ridge was a deep, clear blue, the last light of the sun still touching the tops of the Douglas firs on the western edge of the property. I stood on the land that was mine and breathed the cold air and felt, for the first time in a very long time, the simple and unfamiliar weight of having somewhere to be. My grandfather had spent 8 years watching from a distance, writing letters he could not send, tending a door he could not open, trusting that the person he had loved and protected and hidden would find her way back to the place he had prepared for her. I had found my way back. What came next was mine to build.